Hello. First, I just want to say that I'm sorry I wasn't there yesterday or today. I do want to remind you about your online quiz being due on Thursday. And then if you're not going to be in class on Friday, please turn your lab in today. So if you can remember to do that, that would be really helpful. Alright, so let's just start by reviewing the three types of muscle. So hopefully you have already thought of cardiac, skeletal, and smooth muscle. And then that muscles work in, yes, pairs. And then some of the characteristics of muscle, that they're able to contract, and that they're extensible, and that they're elastic. They return back to their original shape. And then contrasting synergistic and antagonistic muscles. Remember that antagonistic muscles are going to work against each other. Synergistic muscles are going to work with each other. And then a sarcomere is just a contractile unit of a muscle. It goes from one Z-line to the other. And in the sarcomere we have actin and myosin filaments that are sliding past each other. So again, just to kind of review the sliding filament theory. Again, just to kind of review the sliding filament theory. Here we have the purple myosin here, the green actin here, and notice that it's at rest, so that the myosin head is cocked back, kind of like a pistol hammer, or you can think of it kind of like a mousetrap lever. So it's cocked back in position and it's ready. Notice here then the first step is that it's going to attach. We call that cross bridge attachment, where the myosin connects to the actin. Now it's going to expend some energy. See that right there, where it expends the ADP, ATP. That energy molecule gets broken down. The myosin head bends. We call that the power stroke. The actin slides in toward the middle of the sarcomere. Now we need some energy to cock that myosin back in place. So that's the gist of the sliding filament theory. Those basic steps where we start at rest, we attach, power stroke, detach, and that costs some energy, and then the recocking. Notice though that your muscles don't just contract arbitrarily. You control when they contract. So just like on a pistol, when you cock the hammer back, there's a safety, or just like on a mousetrap, when you set the mousetrap, there's something that holds the lever back. Same thing here. This tropamine-tropomyosin complex, these yellow and red parts cover the binding sites, preventing the sarcomere from contracting, or it just prevents it from contracting. In the presence of calcium, however, calcium turns that safety switch off, or turns that part off, exposes those binding sites. So you might remember a long time ago we talked about the role of calcium, and as well as some other atoms. And calcium is important for bone strength, blood clotting, and muscle contraction. So here you can see now why it's so important for muscle contraction, because those calcium ions are going to expose the binding sites. That's going to allow the cross bridge formation. So in order for those myosin filaments to move, we have to have some ATP. We have to have some energy. Mostly that energy is going to be required to detach the actin and the myosin, to detach that cross bridge. That gets to be important for several reasons. So that gets to be important for several reasons. So once again, the tropamine, tropomyosin, these two proteins, that complex, and calcium ions are going to regulate muscle contraction. So your muscles just don't contract arbitrarily. They need a nerve impulse. The nerve impulse will release the calcium. The calcium will expose the binding sites. That's going to allow the muscles to contract, the filaments to slide past each other. So long as there's ATP present, your muscles can contract. So what if there's no ATP present? What happens then? Well, normally, if we run out of ATP in a muscle, we call that a cramp, where our muscles contract and then they're unable to relax. So we call that cramping, or a Charlie horse. When you're dead, of course, you're not producing any ATP, and so within 3 to 4 hours after death, the muscles become stiff because they're unable to relax. Remember that the ATP is necessary for the muscle to be able to relax. So if you're not making ATP, then the muscles can't relax, and they become stiff. So actin and myosin gradually break down, and eventually the muscles will relax again after 2 to 3 days. So this is really helpful to some forensic scientists trying to estimate a time of death. Like, this can be helpful. So let's say we were picking on Marina, and Marina's dead, and she's laying in the woods somewhere, and Abigail's walking through the woods and trips over her corpse. If Marina's corpse is warm and flexible, how long has she been dead? Well, not quite 3 hours, right? If the corpse is stiff, then we know that she's been dead at least 3 to 4 hours. If the corpse is cold and flexible, we know that she's been dead 2 or 3 days. And she probably stinks and is rotting and all that wonderful stuff that accompanies death. But we call that rigor mortis, the stiffening of the muscles, because the muscles are unable to relax without ATP. Notice then the role of nerves. I just want to remind you a little bit about the role of nerves. Like, what role do nerves play? So here's a nerve impulse, travels down the nerve cell, releases a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, ACH, that crosses this little space. The chemical infiltrates the muscle cell, releases the calcium. The calcium release will expose the binding sites that will allow the muscle to contract. Same thing, just a little different view. The nerve impulse travels down the axon, releases the neurotransmitter. The acetylcholine travels deep into the muscle cells, causing the release of calcium. That release of calcium will expose the binding sites on the actin and myosin, and the muscle will be able to contract. Now, if too much calcium gets released, if there's too much calcium that gets released, that can often cause the death of muscle cells. We call that muscular dystrophy. And I do just want to point out again that there are a lot of things that could possibly go wrong. There's a nerve impulse, and there's the release of a neurotransmitter, and there's a release of calcium, there's the exposure of the binding sites, there's the cross-bridge attachment. All these things that happen in order for your muscles to contract, I just want to emphasize that because there's so many steps, there could be a lot of things that could potentially go wrong. So in this case, releasing too much calcium causes a major problem, muscular dystrophy, where muscle cells die and they cannot be replaced. And so, with the death of muscle cells comes a degenerative disease where you get weaker and weaker and weaker. So why do muscles cramp when you're exhausted or fatigued? That's because there's no ATP to release the actin and the myosin so that the muscle can relax. Why is calcium important to muscle contractions? Because calcium exposes the binding sites, allowing the muscles to relax and to contract. What is the physiological cause of muscular dystrophy? Too much calcium being released, destroying the cells, and then they're replaced by scar tissue or fatty tissue, and then you get weaker and weaker and weaker. So why is it that some people can lift heavy weights while others can't? So here we have Eric. He's lifting all this weight right here, and over here we have Joe Schmo. He's trying really hard, but he can't lift the heavy weight. What is it that allows you to be able to lift What is it that allows people to be able to lift heavy weights? Well, I'm going to give you 5 reasons, 5 things that your body needs to do, that your whole muscles need to do in order to contract with maximum force. All right, so 5 things that need to happen for your muscles to contract with maximum force. So if you haven't got a paper out yet, you're going to want a piece of paper. You will want to write some of these things down. So here they are. 5 factors that can maximize muscle contractions. The first is available energy. If you don't have enough energy, your muscles are going to be too tired. They're going to be unable to contract. The second is the length-tension relationships. That's describing the overlap between the actin and myosin. If there's ideal overlap, then you will have maximum force exerted. Recruitment just speaks to how much of your whole muscle is being called upon to lift that weight or make that movement. Summation refers to the idea that muscles can contract harder if a nerve impulse is sent before the muscle has a chance to relax. And finally, the type of muscle fibers. Some muscle fibers are meant for quick, powerful contractions. Others are meant for endurance. So depending on the type of muscle fiber will help determine the kind of strength that you have. So let's start first with available energy. If you have enough energy available, your muscles will be able to contract. You get that energy from ATP. The primary, the number one source for energy in a muscle is already stored there. The ATP is stored in your muscle. That's what it goes to first. So when you first start moving or exercising or doing anything, you already have a little bit of ATP stored in your muscle. You will use that first. Second is creatine phosphate. Creatine phosphate helps to recharge the ATP that you just burned through. So you pick up a 5-pound dumbbell, you lift the weight, you start curling the weight, you're going to burn through the ATP in your muscles pretty quick. Creatine phosphate will help to recharge it, and by recharging it, it'll allow you to continue to contract that muscle temporarily. Once you run out of creatine phosphate, your body's going to start breaking down glucose. Glucose is a simple sugar. Just by breaking down the glucose through the process called glycolysis, that can earn you a little bit of ATP. Then it just is a matter of whether or not you have oxygen present in your muscles. If you have plenty of oxygen present in your muscles, aerobic respiration, then you can break down sugar in the presence of oxygen and get lots and 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 lots of ATP, and that can give you lots and lots of energy. The problem is, no matter how hard or heavy you're breathing, you're not going to be able to get oxygen to your muscles for an indefinite period of time. There's going to come a time when your muscles start to run out of oxygen. Because of that, they're going to switch from aerobic respiration to anaerobic respiration. That means without oxygen, lactic acid fermentation, without oxygen. The problem is, instead of making lots of ATP, anaerobic respiration only makes a little bit. And so you get tired really quickly, and you're unable to sustain those contractions. Now, when you are powerlifting, you're not going to have enough time to get oxygen from your lungs to your muscle before you're done with the exercise. So for example, if you're only doing 3 reps or 5 reps with a really heavy weight, there's not going to be enough time to get the oxygen from your lungs to those muscles. So when you're powerlifting, mostly your muscles are going to be relying on anaerobic respiration. When you're involved with endurance activities, then you have plenty of time. You might be running 2 miles, 3 miles. Lots of time to get the oxygen from your lungs to your muscles, and primarily you're going to be using aerobic respiration. So let's see how it plays out here. Here you have the first 6 seconds. Within the first 6 seconds, you're going to be relying on ATP stored in the muscle. So in the first 6 seconds of exercise, you're using up the ATP that you've stored. Within 10 seconds, you've recycled that ATP with the help of creatine phosphate. But you've already used that up too. So now you need another source of energy. Between 30 and 40 seconds, you're going to be breaking down glucose and glycogen through this process called glycolysis, and that's going to provide you with some energy. If you continue to exercise, now hopefully there's enough oxygen present and your heart beats faster, you can deliver oxygen more quickly, your body will use that oxygen for aerobic respiration, producing enough energy for you to continue to exercise. After you've exercised, you're going to be breathing heavy so that you can pay back your oxygen debt. So by not getting enough oxygen to your muscles, you're going to build up a lot of lactic acid. There's going to be a lot of energy processes that are not going to be, after prolonged exercise, you're going to need to pay that oxygen debt back. So you've had a lot of respiration without the presence of oxygen. Now you're going to breathe heavy to pay that back so you can convert back to aerobic respiration and get lots of energy back to your muscles. The second thing that's important for strong muscle contractions is length-tension relationships. This just describes the overlap of the actin and myosin fibers. Take a look at my little graph here. So this graph represents force here. These represent sarcomeres here, the contractile unit of a muscle. So take a look right here. Here we have too much overlap. Because we have too much overlap, the muscle is already pretty much contracted. Because it's pretty much contracted, it can't generate a lot of force. So here's a muscle that might be cramping up. It might be too stiff. So it can't generate a lot of force because there's too much overlap. So it scores pretty low on our force arc. Here we have a little better length-tension relationship, but it's still too much. It's still too much overlap. So we are able to generate a little bit more force, but we're still not close to our maximum force that we can generate. Here we have an ideal length-tension relationship. So here, because there's proper overlap, optimal overlap, we can exert optimal force with our muscles. Here, there's not enough overlap, and because there's not enough overlap, not all that myosin is able to bind to the actin, so it's not able to produce very much force. And here, the muscle's stretched or torn. There's not an overlap at all. Because there's no cross bridges that can attach, there's no force that can be generated. So here's why it's important for a proper warm-up. If we have a proper warm-up, we can establish optimal overlap and we can exert optimum force. If we don't have enough overlap, if we don't have enough of a warm-up, we might have too much overlap. Or if our muscles are strained or sprained or pulled or overstretched, then it might not be optimal overlap because they're pulled too far. Same thing, just watch what happens with this overlap here. Now it's unstretched muscle, it's only able to exert a little bit of force. Alright, so because it's unstretched, it's not optimum overlap, it's only able to exert a little bit of force. Notice what happens when we moderately stretch or overstretch it. So when we moderately stretch it, we get maximum force. When we overstretch it, we get this little tiny bit of force because there's not enough of a length-tension relationship. Alright, so watch it again. Here's unstretched. It's too tight. The muscle's too balled up. We're not doing too good on our producing of force. Here we have a better relationship. We're able to produce maximum force, optimal force. Here, we're not able, it's overstretched. There's not enough of an overlap. So we're producing minimum force. So we have ATP present. We need energy for our muscles to contract. We need optimal length-tension relationships. We need to be able to recruit a maximum number of motor units. Alright, so let's see what a motor unit is. It's a motor neuron and all the muscle cells that are connected with it. Alright, so I have a nerve cell that's stimulating some muscles, some muscle fibers. Some nerve cells will stimulate large motor units, others will stimulate small motor units. The more motor units that can be involved, the more strength you're going to exert on that movement. So think of it kind of like recruiting for the Army. If there's a lot of people in the Army, if the recruiter's doing his job and getting a lot of people to sign up, then the Army is going to have maximum strength. There's going to be lots of people to be able to do lots of things. So think again about some jobs the Army might have to do. If they're just going to take a building, they might only use a few soldiers. A tactical team can rush in, take the building, secure it, and be done. If they're going to launch a major invasion, then they're going to use lots and lots and lots and lots of soldiers. Similar here. If you're going to pick up a pencil, you're only going to use a few motor units. If you're going to lift 300 pounds, you're going to try to use all of your motor units. You're going to recruit them. So small, fine movements, when you're just lifting up something small, small motor units. When you lift up something heavy, large motor units. It is kind of important to notice that no matter what kind of motor unit is being used, your whole muscle contracts. So when you reach your arm up, you bend it up to scratch your ear, your whole bicep contracts. But it's only a few motor units that are causing that contraction. When you're curling 50 pounds, you're going to be using a lot of motor units, but your whole bicep is being contracted. So let's see how that works. So we'll pick on Byron, let's say. Here's Byron. He's exercising. With 80 pounds, he only uses a few motor units. But if we increase the weight and still only use a few motor units, it won't work. So now, to lift the 120, he has to recruit more motor units. So we increase the weight to 160, now we have to use many motor units because it's a much heavier weight. But look at what happens when we get to 200. Even though we're using most of our motor units, the weight might be too great for us to contract the muscle. Alright, so at some point, we might not be able to lift the weight even though we're recruiting our maximum number of motor units. Here again is an illustration of a motor unit. We have the nerve and the muscle that it signals. So sometimes this nerve is going to be signaling a large number of muscle cells that will make it a large motor unit. Sometimes the nerve will be signaling a small number of muscle cells that'll make it a smaller motor unit. That's what we're illustrating here. So here we'll pick on Kelsey. So Kelsey's at the fair. She's trying to win the teddy bear. She bangs on the bottom to try to ding the bell. Alright, so she's banging on the bottom to ding the bell. So watch what happens. If she uses only a few motor units, she's not going to be very successful. If she uses more motor units, she's definitely going to be successful. But if she recruits all of her motor units, then she's going to exert maximum strength and hopefully ring the bell. Alright, so watch what happens. When we only recruit a small number of motor units, she's only going to exert a small amount of force. When we recruit more motor units, then it's going to exert more force. When she recruits a maximum number of motor units, hopefully she'll be able to ring the bell. The fourth factor is called summation. Summation just describes your body's ability to send a nerve impulse before a muscle has a chance to relax. So if you get another nerve impulse before your muscle has a chance to relax, then we add the strength of those contractions. That's where we get the word summation. So here's a muscle twitch, a single twitch. What that means is a muscle fiber has contracted completely and then relaxed. Muscles are all or none. So when your muscle contracts, the whole thing, the whole muscle cell will contract, or it won't. There's no in between contracting. So when you're bending your arm, those muscle cells are all contracting that are bending your arm. If there's a lot of motor units involved, they're all contracting. If there's a few motor units involved, they're all contracting. But the idea is that a muscle fiber will contract and relax. That's called a muscle twitch. So right there is a single twitch. One contraction and then relax it. If I can send a nerve impulse before it has a chance to completely relax, I can add the strength of the contractions together. That's where I get this right here. So if I'm sending the nerve impulses faster than the muscle has a chance to relax, I can add them together and increase the strength of the contraction. If I continue to increase the strength of the contraction until the muscle is completely contracted, we call that tetanus. Alright, so the muscle is completely contracted. Tetanus can't last forever. At some point, our muscles are going to run out of ATP. The fibers will be unable to stay contracted. Fatigue sets in, and even though we might be sending nerve impulses, we're unable to sustain the contraction. So that's fatigue, being unable to sustain a contraction. Tetanus is when your muscles are fully contracted. We've summed together the strength of each of those muscle cells as we're sending nerve impulses faster than they have a chance to relax. We increase the strength of the contraction until tetanus is fully contracted. Alright, so a sustained, powerful contraction is called tetanus. Fatigue sets in when a muscle is unable to contract. So even though I'm sending the nerve impulses, even though I'm trying to tell my body to do it, the muscle can't contract. Think of it kind of like when you're carrying groceries in from the car or carrying anything. Most guys like to do everything in one trip. That's just how guys are. We like to do everything in one trip. So I get all the grocery bags threaded onto my arms, and then I make the long walk up the sidewalk to get in the door. Well, as I get closer and closer and closer to the door, my muscles start to get fatigued. And even though my head is telling my arms to stay contracted, and don't drop the groceries, if I'm not careful, when my muscles are fatigued, even though my brain is sending the signals, my muscles might be unable to contract, and I might end up dropping the groceries and, of course, breaking the eggs, because that's just how it always seems to go. So here again, a single muscle twitch, completely contracted, all or none, then relax it. If I can send a second impulse before it has a chance to relax, I can add those two together, increase the strength of the contraction, until I get to a place where it's a sustained contraction. We call that tetanus, but we can't sustain the contractions forever. Eventually we're going to tire out. We call that fatigue. So let's take a look at how that works. Alright, so here's our muscle being stimulated. Notice that I'm sending nerve impulses before it has a chance to relax. As a result, the muscle stays fully contracted. We call that tetanus. But it can't stay in tetanus forever. At some point the muscle is going to get tired out. It's going to be unable to sustain the contractions. We call that fatigue. So here it's tiring, 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 fatigue. Alright, so summation is just sending a nerve impulse before it has a chance to relax. By doing that, we can add together the strength of the contractions. So as we add together the strength of the contractions, we get to a point where it's fully contracted. We call that tetanus. A muscle cannot stay in tetanus forever. At some point, it's going to wear out. We're going to be unable to sustain the contraction. And eventually, it's going to tire, 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 until fatigue. Muscle tone then, like sometimes girls are like, I want to go to the gym and tone up a little bit. Muscle tone just describes the idea that the nerves are constantly stimulating muscles to stay contracted. Some motor units are always going to be contracted at some point. Alright, so this is what's giving us our posture. This is what's allowing our muscles to stay slightly contracted, giving them firmness. So if our muscles continue to get nerve impulses, then they stay firm. We call that muscle tone. If those nerve impulses were to somehow be severed or stopped, we would say that there's no muscle tone. The muscles are weak and flaccid because they're not getting that constant nerve impulse. Last thing, slow and fast twitch muscle cells. Slow twitch muscle cells are characterized by lots of mitochondria. Because they have lots of mitochondria, they can be involved in lots of cellular respiration. That is, aerobic respiration. So because there's lots of mitochondria, they can produce prolonged, strong contractions. So think of like an endurance runner. An endurance runner would have lots of slow twitch muscle cells. Lots of mitochondria. They can keep contracting for a long time. Fast twitch muscle cells contract rapidly and powerfully, but without the endurance. These are going to rely mostly on lactic acid fermentation. So these are going to be for sprinters. So if you're a sprinter or a power lifter, these are the kind of muscle cells you want to develop. Fast twitch muscle cells. They contract powerfully, but not for very long. So they're going to rely on a short burst of energy available. Since there's not enough time to get oxygen, lactic acid fermentation will supply them with energy. So here's a picture of someone that has slow twitch muscle cells. So in this case, you'll notice there's going to be a lot of deep red. They're deep red because they have lots of mitochondria. They're going to have high endurance, strong sustained contractions, and a steady supply of energy. A person with fast twitch muscle cells, notice they're going to have a lot of white. Fewer mitochondria, but powerful contractions. So if you want to develop slow twitch muscle cells, you might involve yourself in long distance endurance kind of exercises. If you want to develop fast twitch muscle cells, you want to involve yourself in sprinting and powerlifting. So anaerobic respiration or resistance exercise, that's what's going to build strength and the white muscle fibers to give you powerful contractions. Aerobic exercise will increase your endurance and coordination. More mitochondria in your muscle cells, you'll be able to perform longer. you are at a time in your life when you still have some choices that you can make that will affect your muscles for the long term. By the time you get to my age, my muscle cells are pretty much set. Either they're red or white. There's not a whole lot of in between. At this point in your life, you still have a significant amount that are in between. They could go either way. If you start building your resistance exercise, you can build more white blood cells. If you start building your resistance exercise, you can build more white fibers, powerful, sustained contractions. If you start running longer, then you can increase your endurance and coordination. So Matt wants to lift 300 pounds. What must happen within his muscle to perform that strength? Well, at least 5 things, right? The first thing is he has to have the ATP present. The second, he has to be able to have optimum length-tension relationships. The third, he has to be able to recruit as many motor units as he possibly can. The fourth, he has to be able to sum as much strength as he can. And last, he has to have a lot of white, powerful muscle cells for that burst of strength. Some athletes take creatine as a dietary supplement. How might that help their workouts? Well, within the first 6 seconds, they run out of energy, ATP, in their muscle cells. Creatine will help recharge it and allow them to continue exercising maybe another rep or two. And that can, of course, help build their muscle size and strength. Sarah wants to run cross country, or in this case, maybe Megan or Courtney. They like running cross country. What type of exercise will help her improve? So in this case, aerobic exercise will help her improve by building more slow twitch, high endurance muscle cells.